Welcome to Duck Season Somewhere podcast. This episode is brought to you by the following sponsors. For 365 days a year, it's duck season somewhere at Ramsey Russell's GetDucks.com. The world of duck hunting is way bigger than our backyard. The very best duck hunts in Argentina and Mexico are only the beginning. We specialize exclusively in 6 continents worth of proven waterfowl hunting adventures. Whether you're looking for a unicorn species or a fun trigger pulling vacation of epic proportion, we've got the right hunt dialed in. Real duck hunts and authentic experiences for serious duck hunters. As a genuine American duck hunter myself, I know the difference. Founded in 2003, GetDucks.com is not just what we do, it's all we do. I've been there personally many times. Our reputation speaks for itself. Anita and I are personally available to assist before, during, and after your trip because you deserve nothing less. Looking for something closer to home? The next great hunt is closer than you think. Contact proven operators throughout the U.S. and Canada at our U.S. hunt list. Explore worldwide duck hunting at GetDucks.com. All package details, photos, videos, stories, and thousands of client testimonials right there at your fingertips. GetDucks.com. Ball Shot Shell's copper-plated bismuth tin alloy is the good old days again. Steel shots come a long way in the past 30 years, but will never, ever be like good old-fashioned lead. No way. Say goodbye to all the gimmicky, high recoil, compensation, science, and marketing hype, and hello to superior performance. Know your pattern, take ethical shots, make clean kills. That is the boss way. The good old days are now. It really is duck season somewhere for 365 days per year. Duck season somewhere takes me year-round to worldwide destinations where I visit with the most interesting people. I'm your host, Ramsey Russell. Join me here to listen to those conversations. This is Ramsey Russell, Get Ducks. It's duck season somewhere. I'm sitting at SEI day 2. Got to tell y'all about this story. You know, we've got this booth with 6 continents worth of waterfowl, hunters from all over the world coming and going, asking questions. A lot of them come in, you know, what kind of duck is this, or what kind of duck is that, or where did you get that particular species? Like a spread of decoys. You know, this collection of beautiful birds just attracts people. So yesterday afternoon, it's like a red light had stopped, and, you know, traffic slowed down, and up walked this guy, and he hangs around my booth. He goes through my brochures. Martha's talking to him. I'm talking to a client. I get done to introduce myself. He says, yes, I need some information on African black ducks and yellowbills. That's my guy, man. So I flew into Africa, and we started talking about African black ducks. You know, well, I don't have an African black duck, guys. I don't have one yet because they're kind of a hard species. You know, they fly in pairs. They don't fly in big flocks, and they got this affiliation for these little, they call them rivers over in Africa, but I think of it as little Colorado trout streams. And to kill one, it's going to take the commitment of my sitting out by one of these rivers all day long until quack, 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 one comes by. And I'm willing to do that. So we start talking, and this guy knows all this. And as we talk more, he says, no, I don't need the hunt. I need genetic samples. We then had a conversation about mallards and about mallards of the world at a level that really just kind of blew my mind. And I said, hey, I interrupted him finally. I said, hey, can you meet in the morning and let's record a podcast about this topic matter? Listen, guys, especially you southern duck hunters, but all you duck hunters out there listening, hold on to your hat like we're fixing to run down a dirt road in the back of a pickup truck because I think this conversation is going to blow your mind. To me, it brings a lot of scientific credibility to what a lot of us duck hunters are observing out in the field or think we're observing about population declines, about migrational shifts, about the mallards not migrating maybe as far south as they used to. Y'all hang on and listen. My guest today is Lavretsky. He's an assistant professor at the University of Texas, El Paso. His field of study is wildlife genetics. And the topic of this conversation is population genetics as it applies to the world mallard complex. How you doing today, Phil?
Doing really good, Ramsey. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about chatting about this topic and getting everybody on board and understanding what's going on out there.
You blew my mind yesterday. I'm used to duck hunters coming in and asking me, what kind of duck is that? Or asking me something about, they see that Mexican mallard, which you quickly identified as, hey, that's a Mexican mallard. And most guys think it's a hen mallard or a mottled duck or something to that effect. So I knew you knew a little something about something. Tell me, in general terms, what is your background? I mean, I know you're obviously a duck hunter.
Yeah. So my family actually came to the States from Russia in 89, moved to Los Angeles because we had some family there, and then within, I don't know, by 7-8 years, when we had just enough money, my dad got a shotgun and we went back out hunting because that's what he did in Russia, and since been hunting since I was 9, and duck hunting's been in my blood since I was 10.
Which part of Russia was he from?
Moscow area.
Really?
Yeah.
The first morning I ever hunted in Russia, I was crotch deep in a frozen creek, wearing hip boots, so I was cold. I was wet up to the crotch, and a single greenhead. We had a single coot decoy, and a single greenhead flew over, and I fumbled around in my pocket till I found my call, barked out 3 lousy notes, mack, 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 and that bird looked like he'd hit the end of a short rope and curled up right into those decoys, and I clobbered him with a double trigger, double barrel Russian over and under that I'd never shot before. And I got excited. And broke off a big limb and reached out there and pulled him into the bank, asked the guy I was with, will you take a picture? He's like, really? It's a mallard. I go, you ever shot a mallard in Russia? But,
it's exciting.
And I tell people all the time, Phil, and it is a lot of truth to this. My favorite duck is the next one over the decoys, because I guarantee I'm going to shoot him. And, but after all these 100+ species of birds in all these countries and everything else, I've got a thing for mallard ducks, or the mallard-like ducks, I call them. They all act and behave similarly, but they do what we duck hunters want them to do. They behave. They play by the rules. You call to them, they decoy, they do things, they move, they react. And I guess really and truly put a gun to my head, if I had to hunt only one species of duck worldwide, it would be a mallard or something very closely to him.
Well, I don't think you're alone. I think there's a lot of folks out there that want to make sure that there's enough mallards out there for them to shoot, and seeing them over the spread every fall and every winter.
Most guys think of mallard ducks as being, American, and they're not. They're circumpolar. They cover the entire northern hemisphere.
Yep. So out of all the species out there, right? So there's about 13 to 14 mallard-like ducks it's a pretty good, what we call radiation. They were successfully adapted to different islands and continents, but it's the mallard that's the only one that's got that whole Arctic or circumpolar all the way through Eurasia and through North America, and they've been basically brought and released now, in the southern hemisphere, New Zealand. You could find a few of them here and there somewhere in South America. I know they're in Africa now, local populations.
The actual mallard duck is in Africa.
Well, no, domestic variants of the mallard.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. Well, New Zealand's a prime example of where they brought in some mallard duck, and you see them all kind of with bluebills and.
Yeah. So the mallard in New Zealand. So I work. So that's part of my work, my study. We've got a sample set of about, I think, 700. And I've identified them. So what happened in New Zealand, right? So they went out, they're like, oh, well, we want greenheads too. So they went to Europe, they got some birds, they released them. They're like, they're doing okay. They went out, they're like, oh, let's go to North America. They got some birds out of North America. But the fun fact is they didn't get wild birds. They went and just bought game farm birds and released them. And the genetic signature now that we find in New Zealand is most closely to game farm birds that all have a European origin.
All right, now break. When we started talking yesterday, let's go back to this initial point and build up to what you're talking about, because yesterday you came in asking about the African black duck and the yellow bill, then we started talking about the Mexican duck, and you flew off into the origins of it. And I have been kind of sort of kicked in the teeth on the social media for my anecdotal observations about mallard-like complex and describing Mexican ducks and different things, and I get pointed out very quickly of what their origins are and genetically and everything else, and I learned yesterday that some of those guys kicking me in the teeth are wrong based on your genetic studies. Let's go back. How did your research start with black ducks?
Yeah, so my research started with just trying to build a data set with every single one of these mallard-like ducks, just a few samples, and start to understand their actual relationships. And from there, we started to see certain patterns. And then what we do now is landscape level sampling. So we're talking about hundreds of samples, making sure we have source populations, potential hybrids, everything that you might be able to see, males, females, hatch years after hatch years. We try to get the gamut and across the ranges of these species to really answer the question, what are these things? Are they hybridizing? What's happening? What's their real evolutionary lineage? Because you might look at a bird in hand and it looks like a hybrid, but potentially you're just looking at, white wing bars that might be just ancestry, not hybrids. But to be able to do that definitively, you gotta find real hybrids, real genetic hybrids, and that's what we do. We go from, again, pure parental through hybrids if they're out there, and then not only are we doing the genetics, but we identify genetic markers that are linked to various traits. So what you're seeing, the coloration of the bill or the green in the head, these types of things.
So you would go out, for example, and say you would start collecting genetic samples on American black ducks. You would start collecting genetic samples on populations or cohort populations of mallard ducks. You would then look at the Mexican duck. You would then look at the Florida mottled duck. You would then look at the coastal mottled duck. Then with each of those subsets, you start breaking out subsets of that subset.
That's correct.
Then at some point at the end of the range, you would start finding cross-pollination of sorts.
Yeah, so that was the initial reason for it. We've all been under the guise that all these things are just breeding the hell out of things, especially the mallard breeding with all of them, and we're losing everybody. I mean, look at the Mexican duck. Its taxonomy has changed just because people have said, oh, they're a hybrid swarm. And so that's been an important thing that I wanted to test and to see, is that correct? Are there just no more, North American brown ducks out there really, or what's really going on? And the crux of it, we published a paper on the exact same thing. It was a North American mallard-like complex study, and basically we have a hard time finding hybrids in the brown ducks.
Really?
Yeah, and we now know
Florida models aren't going to cross-pollinate with the...
They do, but not to the extent that everybody thinks they are.
Okay.
They are, the levels of hybridization in any of these guys, outside of American black duck, and I'll touch on that, is below or at level of any other bird complex. So in birds, there's just a natural especially in ducks that do the extra pair copulation thing, where, you got extra mating going on. If a hen fails on a nest or something like that, you might get crossbreeding in that sense, and that's kind of how you get pintail mallard and pintail gadwall.
So if a hen mallard breeds with a greenhead, and she has a nest failure, he may be off molting and doing his thing. Now she's looking for whoever she can get.
That's right. And that's when you get some of these hybridization events, and you get these kinds of patterns in other birds and everything like that. But for the Mexican duck, right? So we, there was early work that basically said the whole northern population is a hybrid swarm. We got birds all the way from the U.S. Through Chihuahua, all the way down to Pueblo, Mexico, Sonora, Sinaloa on the coast. And we did genetics in all of them. And lo and behold, I can't find a hybrid south of the border. And there's about a 5% hybridization rate in the U.S. And this is a bird that we thought was on the brink of just genetic extinction. Right?
Normally hybridized with a mallard.
Mallard, yeah. And that makes sense because mallards come to well, not anymore in numbers the way they used
like
to.
Like cousins at a family reunion.
Yeah, they come in the winter, but they don't. But for them to actually breed, they got to stay there and pair bond. They're not. They're going back north.
Or they got to be resident mallards.
Or they're resident mallards.
The American black duck, according to a lot of internet warriors, is virtually extinct.
Right.
It is, and I do see a lot of hybrids, a lot of greens, a lot of curls, a lot of different little things. What are we getting at there? I mean, fact, the American black duck is extinct because the clearing of the boreal forest and the mallards moved in and bred them to extinction, or what?
No, exactly the opposite. So what we're finding, so like I said, if you look at Mexican ducks, you're looking at 0% south of the border, about 5% hybridization rate in the north. Mottled ducks, if you look at both Florida and in West Gulf Coast, you're looking at 5%. Our estimates, and also other people have done a few other studies, and they basically find the same thing, real hybrids, about 5% of them, which again is at level of any other bird group. Now, American black ducks, we find a hybridization rate of about 25%. Now, that is really high, but the big point here is that what we find is that when those hybrids, right, the first generation, mom black duck, dad mallard breed, make a bunch of admixed, hybrids. Those hybrids tend to actually breed with mallards, not black ducks. So they're not actually moving mallard genes into black ducks.
So once that F1 generation, that first generation of hybrid begins to breed themselves, they're not further diluting the black ducks. They're just polluting
mallards,
the mallard woodpile.
The woodpile, that's right. Yeah, and so if you can think about this so there were no mallards really, even 100 years. 1920 is when mallards started to pop up in the east, right? So mallards native.
Historically, there weren't a lot of mallards.
Mallards naturally were a western bird, west of the Mississippi. You had vagrants. You can look up records, old records, and you could barely shoot a greenhead in the east. If you got one, that was like shooting a cinnamon teal in the east.
Wow.
But now, obviously, they're one of the they're one of the more populous.
It had been wooded. It had been forested.
That's right. They're not
swampy,
adapted to that.
It had been coastal estuaries.
They're an open prairie kind of bird.
Yeah.
And black ducks are the ecological fit for the east of a mallard. They are a mallard, but what happened was that they lost the greenhead and they became black because, as you can imagine, a greenhead in a boreal forest might get picked off by a predator. But a black bird, both male and female, won't. So you got so there's less pressure like that. It's more pressure for just staying alive than it is the whole making greenheads.
They just ecologically evolved to blend into the shadows of a peat bog.
And so between a whole bunch of studies here, what we're finding is that black ducks have always been very genetically very similar to mallards, and so have Mexican ducks and mottled ducks. And it's not because of hybridization and gene flow and interbreeding and all this stuff. It's because of ancestry. And what the story looks like is that a mallard likely colonized North America. Greenhead colonized North America, spread across North America.
From Europe.
And then probably got cut off from Europe, so it started to, diverge from the European mallard. But then what happened with glaciers coming in, the boreal forests on the east, basically, if you can imagine a glacier coming in the middle of North America, you're separating the east and the west. In the east, there's recession, so those populations were in a new habitat, this boreal forests. And this is what caused the divergence and the evolution of black ducks. Now, Florida mottled ducks, West Gulf Coast mottled ducks, and Mexican ducks, those regions were actually refugia, where other species were able to survive and continue, even in glacier, when that glacier was around. So we know that these were important. And that's exactly what happened. A bunch of mallards were probably caught there, got stuck there and then changed into what we now consider Florida mottled duck, West Gulf Coast mottled duck, and Mexican duck.
It's just a function of geographical
isolation.
Genetic isolation.
That's right.
They begin to morph into something more blends in with that environment.
That's right. And the data that we've got that really supports this is a whole bunch of birds that we thought were hybrids, right? Got the green in the head. You know, you got a Mexican duck. Yeah, it's brown, but it's got green in the head, curl. You got the black rump. You got some white tails, maybe some speckling going on. And we now have confirmed this in Mexican duck, mottled ducks, black ducks, and especially Hawaiian ducks. And when we really did the genetics, none of them are hybrids. What they were first-year males.
Oh.
And so as they go from first-year male to second year, they lose those traits because, as you can imagine, they're like a teenager. They can't control their hormones, so they're expressing not correctly some of these mallard genes that are still there. But as they become an adult, they can control that, and now they're a good bird. Perhaps this is important for females to make sure they're choosing an adult male that's, you know, got good genetics. It can be that brown duck that she wants or whatever it is. But these birds are not hybrids. So you might be in the U.S. and you shoot something that's a hybrid, but if it's a hatch year or first year, it's hard to say if that's really a hybrid.
Some people say that some people have told me in social media or some of the inboxes and conversations we've had, and that the Mexican mallard, Mexican duck, the Asia, is really more related to the black duck, that the mottled ducks are more related to the black ducks. And I keep going back to, wait a minute, that Mexican mallard has double white wing bars. Not only does it have a double white wing bars, but it's like the top white bar trails into the tertiary, on a hen, and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it just, and every once in a blue moon, I'm just trying to keep up with you at a fourth grade level, man. It's every once in a blue moon, well, number one, I can distinguish on a clear day. I can distinguish the drakes from the hens, even in the Mexican duck. They're both brown ducks, like mottled, but if you pay attention,
you can see them.
You can see the difference. They're slightly bigger, got the brighter bill.
Yep.
And boy, they behave to the call a little bit different than the hen, even if they're dating and holding hands at the time. But every now and again, I'll shoot a really nice adult Mexican mallard drake, and I'd say 1 out of 10 or 20, and he has not a full curl, but he's got that that center tail feather that starts to curl over. And so I say he's got to have some mallard back in his genetic, not a hybrid necessarily.
Now, where was that?
Down in Sonora.
Oh, it's in Sonora.
It's just every once in a blue moon, it's not a full curl, it's just a little bit of ducktail in the back.
Oh, yeah, no, the little tiny rays, that's not indicative at all.
That's not indicative at all.
You got to have almost a full curl. Yeah, no, even black ducks, that little rays, that's still part of their just kind of mallard gene
pool. Something they do. Yeah, mallard gene pool.
And you can imagine, these traits are going away. It just hasn't been enough time in all these brown ducks, right? So what traits are going to be seen in the kids is just a random event of who mates with who. If I mate with you, you might have a little bit of a raise of a curl, maybe a little bit more white wing, maybe a little bit of, even in like a
blue eyes, green eyes, bushy eyebrows, freckles.
Even when you look at an adult Mexican duck and you look at that top of the head, and same thing with black ducks. If you hit that light just right, you'll see those green specks on the top of the head.
Sure.
Across all of them.
That's right.
And you can see
hit it just right. You can see that little bit of green sheen on all of them.
That's still there. That's part of their ancestry, and not because of hybridization. So let me tell you, what I need to say is so mottled ducks, right? So the mottled ducks, Florida mottled duck, West Gulf Coast mottled duck, are as different from one another as they are from mallards. All three of them are equidistant from each other genetically. And again, you've got certain traits. So, for example, in Florida mottled duck, we were doing a study. They thought there was, the white wing bar in a mottled duck. That's no good, right? But what me and my colleagues in some previous work found was that actually the white wing bar is seen in pure mottled ducks, but at a 10% level, right?
Yeah.
So if you were a biologist out there and saw, 1 in 10, 10 in 100, you're like, well, all of those are hybrids, right? Everybody else looks 90%. You're looking at a bird with no white wing bar. But So the ones with the white wing must be hybrids, but that's just not the case. It's actually it looks like it, and that trait is going away with time. But that trait's there because of ancestry and not because of hybridization.
With all the genetic studies on the brown ducks, the mallard-like ducks in North America, y'all have actually developed a diagnostic key, kind of like a key for a tree or anything else.
Yep.
That you're going to send me so I can know.
That's right. We first so we made one. My colleagues made one for Florida. That was the first one ever. And Florida Fish and Game went from 60% correctness calling hybrids to better than 90%. So that was a real good success. So that means them calling hybrids was a flip of the coin. A lot of it was attributed to that white wing bar. That's not actually diagnostic for a hybrid. You got to have these other types of traits. They need to be adults or juveniles, and they have their own keys. And now we've got a working key or working in progress key for Mexican ducks that we've developed. And we've got it where regionally, where you are, because these traits change. So as you go further south for Mexican ducks, the juveniles don't even show the mallard-like traits because it's been lost. The way Mexican ducks evolved, they kind of did the stepwise progression from north to south. So imagine the northern population, U.S. Chihuahua, that was the Mexican duck population. That is the Mexican duck population. It's got all the genetics of all Mexican ducks, right? And imagine a few individuals all of a sudden decide, there's too many of us, and they fly south. They finally find a patch of water, they colonize it, they explode. Then a little while later, a few more individuals go south. And every time they do this, they're moving only a little bit of that genetics. And by the time you go to Pueblo, the genetics that were moved, they basically gotten rid of all of the mallard ancestry. So they're not even showing mallard traits down there.
Oh, what period of time would they shrug off that pure mallard ancestry?
So our estimates suggest that
100 years?
No, or hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, it takes a long time.
Well, you were telling me yesterday, for example, that speaking about the Mexican duck,
yep.
You were telling me that I had said to you that the greatest density of Mexican ducks I've ever seen, and I've seen them all throughout the mountains. I've seen them some in the east, not too far south, but Sonora, that Yaqui Valley in Sonora has just got a booming population. Who knows? They don't count them down. Hundreds of thousands of these freaking things. And but you had said that those birds weren't even there a period of time ago.
Yep. So I was there.
Like in my lifetime.
Yeah. No. I was there in 2013. Easy picking. I can go down a canal. Mexican ducks everywhere, right? 2s, 3s, kind of like you could just watch them.
Oh yeah.
You could be on the estuaries. You'll get Mexican ducks coming in, right? I had a colleague, a buddy, also doing similar research back in '91. Could only find one Mexican duck in Sonora.
In '91.
In '91, there were basically nothing.
I was still in college in '91. Wow.
There was and if you went to Sonora, you'd just be shooting your pintail and cinnamon teal and all the others. But you will have a hard time finding a Mexican duck.
And that'd be attributed just to a ducks, and not necessarily a mallard, but just a duck's innate nature to exploit resources. They're engineered. They got wings. They fly. They find food. They find water. They find habitat. And they do what ducks do. They thrive.
That's why ducks are so adaptive and so they can. You could have a couple bad years. If you got one good year, they're gonna blow up, and they do this all the time, right? They can hold off, and they can exploit new resources. That's the beauty of ducks, and why at least they're not completely vulnerable to change, and that's beautiful. So going back to that Sonora, right? So we got birds out of Sonora and Sinaloa. And when we looked at the genetics, we wanted to know we knew that they weren't there pre-1990, so we wanted to know where they came from. And actually, they basically they carry all the genetics of the Chihuahuan population. That's their source. So a few birds from Chihuahua, and we actually have a idea of where they went through through a river, across a pass through these mountains. As you go from Chihuahua to Sonora, and they probably hit all the ag fields and the canals that were being built at that time, and just kind of took them to the coast and hit the coast. Boom, you got a big old population 20 years later. So that's the remarkable fashion. There were no Mexican ducks. These Mexican ducks were able to pretty quickly find this resource, adapt, and explode. And now you got all kinds of birds out there.
I want to wake up everybody that's still listening. I'm nerding out on this kind of stuff. I love it, and I know a lot of you guys do too. But I want to bring this thing back around on point of why I wanted Phil to come and visit today and give us an explanation. So y'all hang on, okay? Phil, we were talking about black ducks. We were talking about they had become genetically extinct because of hybridization. No, it's only 25% hybridization, of which the offspring are able to further pollute the woodpile. The 75% of American black ducks remain pure. How pure? How can you, in a timeline of history,
Yep.
How far back can you say, okay, the black duck today is the black duck of yesteryear?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to answer that question, we actually went back to historical. So I partnered up with the Smithsonian. Thankfully, people have been shooting ducks for a long time. And especially mallard-like ducks. So there's a really nice collection of birds at the various museums. And basically, so we know that there were no real mallards pre-1920, and I guess I have to step back. So what happened in 1920? Well, in 1920, some folks decided that there should be greenheads in the east, and what
Rich club members probably.
No. That it's federal, state, and private all
really?
decided.
Oh,
the duck stamp. There were special. This was pre-duck stamp, so it was special state taxes that were going to be used to buy, to have run facilities, to grow mallards.
Wow.
Yeah, and so from 1920 to 1960, they released 500,000, 500,000 birds per year. Per year.
500,000 birds per year.
Just in the Atlantic Flyway.
And where were they releasing these birds? Throughout the Flyway?
Throughout the Flyway, yeah. Throughout the Flyway, all the way, Maine, all the way down probably definitely to the Carolinas. We got records of that.
Well, I can remember South Carolina Waterfowl Association, or somebody had an avid, I think, am I right, back in the late 90s, we're still turning those birds out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they're still doing it.
Still doing it.
So 1960, that was about 500,000. Things slowed down. The feds and the states said, this is probably not a good idea.
Why'd they say that?
I don't know why. Well, I don't know what they said. They just stopped. Yeah, probably money. But the private folk decided, no, let's keep doing this, and they still release. So we've the best records we've got. There's about 250,000 birds that are recorded game farm birds that are being released in the U.S. 210 of those are in the Atlantic Flyway.
Where were they getting those?
And that's 210,000.
210. Where were they going? Were they getting them out of wild strain mallards from out west? Where do you buy mallards? 500,000 mallards a year that you're turning loose into the wild?
Yeah. So I guess we're going to jump the gun here.
So back up if you need to.
All right. Let me back up. So you got that going on, and then we talked about that the boreal forest was being cut down. So perhaps wild mallards from the west moving east, and so you got this double-edged sword that's coming to the black duck. Right? Black ducks never saw anything else but black ducks, and so there was a lot of competition, not only for resources,
like those
mates.
Covered wagons coming over the hill to
They're
Native
all
America,
coming,
man.
east and west. They're coming at these black ducks now. For the black duck. So there's that in the 60s, 70s, especially in the 80s, there's tons of great research out there being like, oh man, how bad is it for the black duck? Where how much competition for resource, food, mates is there? And basically folks chalked it up and said, hey, I think we lost the black duck. And so I came in to answer this question. I really was looking for understanding what's happening to the black duck. Do we have black ducks? Good pure black ducks. And to answer this, we did 200 black ducks from the Mississippi Flyway and Atlantic Flyway. Covered it with another 100 mallards from there, another 50 west of the Mississippi, kind of a prairie pothole birds. And then we went to the Smithsonian and got birds that were shot before 1920. So these birds were shot from 1860 to 1915, so something about 120, 150-year-old birds.
And you can still genetically profile them.
That's right. Yeah, so we've got new techniques that we can get great genetic material out of them. We're not talking about 1-2 genes. We're talking about thousands of genes.
Yeah, wow.
So the question is, if the American black duck is extinct, then what a black duck was 150 years ago.
And about 1870.
From 1860 and 1915. Similar pattern, similar time frames for both mallards and for black ducks. So we got a bunch of mallards from 1860 and 1915, and a bunch of mallards and black ducks from that time period. So we compared, current populations against current populations. We compared it across the different flyways. We compared all of that to our historical stuff, right? And in Crux, the black ducks that we find now that are we've identified as genetically pure black ducks today are identical to black ducks from 150 years ago.
Same black duck back
genetically,
in the 1870s.
Same thing. Same bird, right? So that means black ducks somehow have escaped complete annihilation from mallards, right? And to get to that point, that means good black ducks are picking black ducks.
Yeah.
Right? That's the only way that this works, is that what's left are good black ducks. All the birds.
I just had no joke cross my mind, but I'm going to leave it alone. Go ahead.
You leave that alone. So you can imagine over 100 years of mallards being there and black ducks being there, all the birds are like, well, you kind of look like a black duck, and you pick wrong, and you basically have a bunch of dead end offspring. You're done. So what's left are birds picking correctly. Right? So today, that's why we got black ducks. It's because black ducks are picking black ducks, going to breed in a boreal forest where mallards don't go. And we got data where it's almost like a force field. We got tracker data going, GPS trackers. Mallards hit like the boreal forest and just stop. They rarely ever cross over that. Clearly, they don't survive very well there. So that's a good thing. So basically, as long as we got good black duck habitat, we're going to have black ducks. Now we're continuing on this study. Potentially, we got to get birds in different places. I've heard anecdotal stuff from hunters where, potentially all the black ducks that use real coastal wetlands are real black ducks, but the interior black ducks, in quotes, are actually just probably hybrids or just mallard whatever things.
There may be a little bit of genetic variation between coastal black ducks, because when you talk to the guys up in New England, the guys in New Jersey, New York that seriously hunt black ducks, they're hunting those coastal estuaries, just brackish native habitat. But then you've got to have, I would ask myself, is it those black ducks that find their way migrating down the Mississippi Flyway to northern Alabama and parts of Mississippi and Arkansas, or is it probably those interiors?
Yeah, it's probably interiors. And are they good black ducks?
May be a little different.
I don't know.
Well, what about if the black duck is genetically identical to the late 1800s? What about the mallard duck?
Yeah, so the mallard was just a side note to this study. We weren't even looking for it, but we started picking up interesting and strange patterns in mallards, and particularly there were two kind of genetic types of mallards that we were picking up in North America. When you went west of the Mississippi, it was one genetic type. We called this the North American wild mallard. And
where approximately are we looking at on a map of the U.S.?
Yes,
North American wild mallard.
Our samples are so when you go west of the Mississippi, so prairie pothole birds, so everything, you got what is that province? Alberta, Manitoba, and west through Alaska, same bird, right? You start going to the Atlantic Flyway, and you start picking up two types of birds there. And so when we did the same kind of stuff between like we do for black ducks. We looked at these mallards again, mallards in the west, mallards in the Atlantic Flyway, mallards in the Mississippi, and compared them to 150-year-old mallards. And basically, western mallards are identical to 150 years ago.
So the birds coming down the Central Flyway, Kansas, Oklahoma, and the parts of northern Texas, that's that same 150-year-old genetic. So far. Right now, for the time being.
But you go to the Atlantic Flyway, and they are more different from those birds than a mottled duck is from a mallard.
Wow. Now, how so? What different? How? What are they related to? What are they? How are they different?
Yeah, so just looking at their genes and the genetics, the types of genes they have. So, for example, a mottled duck is about 4% different from a mallard, a wild mallard. A Mexican duck's only 2%, and a black duck's only 1%. These things are over 10% different from a wild North American mallard. And so we said, wow, what is going on? And so to answer that question correctly,
like a statistically significant sample was way different than native mallard.
That's right.
And you said, whoa,
I said
something's up.
So we wanted to know the source. Now, going back to history, we said, well, there's only two sources here. We got either wild western mallards that were coming in because the boreal forests were changing, or we got these 500,000 game farm birds that were being released. Now, if you think about fisheries, and you think about bobwhite, and think about pheasants, those birds are all non-native. Those fisheries, you think of trout and salmon that we captively breed and we put out there. There's tons of data that even 3-4 generations into captivity, these things are starting to look and act different. So we had this notion. Now, I was on the predisposition, as most probably lots of folks in North America, that game farm birds, the game farm bird releases have been happening obviously for over a century, and but the idea, the dogma, was that these birds either A, all get shot, B, stay on the pond that they are released on, or C, if they do make it into the wild, they don't breed.
They're predated, or
they're predated.
Can't
they can't compete. They're not good at it. Whatever it is. So again, that's why I never even thought about it. But I saw that genetic signature and I said, you know what? We need to go get some game farm birds. So we got birds out of Jersey, New Jersey, Kentucky, and South Carolina. These are birds being released either for hunting or for dog training. So these are kind of game farm birds. These. On top of that, what we also wanted to know, maybe it's park mallards, right? You got those big pecking park mallard things. And in where we band around El Paso, Texas, there's a whole bunch of what we call feral birds. So these are park ducks. Yeah, they're ducks in the wild with other wild birds potentially able to breed. Feral, like feral pig. Right, they got a domestic origin, but are in the wild.
Well, I mean, I see on social media people hold up some duck they shot all the time. Say, what kind of duck? It's a ruined duck, or one of these park mallard variants, of some sort. They got a little laugh-lack in the wood pile.
That's right. That's right. And so we the birds that were out there we identified as khaki Campbells. So that's the breed.
Khaki Campbells.
Khaki Campbells. They're a breed. Somebody released them. They were out there. They were out there during breeding season. So I said, hey, these are feral mallards.
Where would they have gotten them from?
Oh, you could buy them.
So they're a greenhead.
Well, they used to be a greenhead. These things are khaki.
Okay.
Khaki color.
I've seen those before. I've seen some with little
all that garbage on them.
Little afros or something.
Yeah, that's right.
I've seen that kind of stuff.
So they're out there. They can breed. So we got those and be like, well, maybe it's park mallards, right? Maybe they're the problem. No. So to get to it, our research basically 100% confirms that's game farm mallards being released by game farm preserves. That is the other genetic signature now found all through the Atlantic Flyway, starting to creep into the Mississippi and even further west.
But now, Phil, so what? It's a greenhead. Right. It quacks like a duck. It comes in, and it looks good on the strap. It's a mallard. I mean, as long as it ain't got a little Aflac or a little ruin in it, who cares? I mean,
yeah. So that's about where they end.
I remember somebody in Arkansas. There was a shooting preserve in Arkansas shooting mallards like that.
I'm sure there was.
In all places near Stuttgart.
You got real birds out there. What are you doing?
But I mean, so I'm being facetiously, and I'm saying, big deal. It's a mallard. What are the implications?
So what are the implications? Right. So we've established that these things. So game farm mallards have half the genetic diversity. So they're not very adaptive, right? So now you're putting this inbred line into our kind of diverse line. And what happens when you do that is you inbreed your own line. So that's one thing. But the other thing is they basically only look like a mallard, and they're far from it. A black duck is more like a mallard than these game farm mallards.
Well, what would be some, you were telling me the other day.
Yep.
some of the key differences that would affect their reproductive
capacity. So these game farm mallards are about, you're looking at a bird that's 700 to 900 grams. So they're these small flighty birds, right? Kind of the size of maybe a widgeon, maybe a little between a widgeon and a gadwall. Now look at our wild North American mallards, and they should be around 1,100, 1,200 grams. Big bird.
Wow.
So you got a significant difference. So now they're smaller. Are they going to be able to survive those harsh winters of the East? Are they going to be able to do that? Do they have the right fat preserves? On top of that, me and my colleagues, my colleagues in Europe, so Europe is having a real problem. Their wild strain's almost gone. Wild mallard strain is almost gone.
One of the best, funnest duck shoots and I've ever been in was in Sweden shooting
flyover.
Yeah, I mean just ducks. Jump shooting driven mallards, and they were not wild mallards.
They're
Most
not wild
of them
mallard.
were tame birds.
So these are domestic mallards. They have, do they know how to migrate? Do they know how to survive? Where are they? Now, the more important thing is that we already have the data on their bills. So their bills have completely changed, and they've changed because think about what they've been eating for the last 100+ years, right? We've been breeding them for 100 years. So a fact that I haven't mentioned is that we now have pretty good data. Not pretty good. This is pretty substantial data that these are European origin mallards in North America. So
not European wild mallards.
No, European domestic.
European domestic.
That's right.
Key word.
European domestic mallards. So we've been breeding for 100. Who knows how many
English
generations? Yeah, that's right. So the history. So just to pivot quickly on that, the history of these of what happened in North America. So a few folks did try to breed wild mallards. That wasn't very successful. They tried black ducks. That wasn't very successful just because you're putting wild birds into captivity. You're not going to get the output. And then they went to Europe and said, well, these guys figured it out. They got birds that dump eggs. As long as you put them on Purina chow, they could breed year round, right? That's a perfect domestic bird. They went and bought them. They brought them here, and that's what's been bred here. What I find in Kentucky, in New Jersey, and South Carolina is the exact same domestic lineage of mallard, and they're all of European descent. So a single lineage was brought into Europe, and then people bought them.
If I go shoot a limit of mallards in one of those states or in that region, what am I looking at in terms of what's the odds? I'm in Reno. What's the odds that it's going to be a wild strain mallard?
Yeah, so if you're in the Atlantic Flyway, right? So when I did the study in 2010, so it's been a decade. I could only over 90% of birds that I found in the Atlantic Flyway had these game farm mallard genes in them in substantial amounts. So that means you got a 10% chance that if you pull a trigger on a greenhead in the Atlantic Flyway right now, that you're actually shooting a wild North American mallard and not just some sort of game farm mallard hybrid.
Wow. And probably what we can expect is in the future to see more tame-looking, Aflac-looking woodpile mallard crop up on social media.
I feel like that's exactly what I'm starting to see. I'm starting to see more and more pictures and guys saying, wow, this is a weird hybrid. And I'm like, no, that's just a game farm bird.
Yeah. And it's not like they're hunting right next to the city park. I mean,
No, and so what this research really exemplifies is that, so going back to this idea that these game farm birds don't survive, don't breed is nonsense. These things, for them to have all these genes in the wild means that these birds not only leave their pond, but they successfully breed in the wild with mallards. And again, going back, because we studied black ducks and mallards together with this, where we see the game farm mallards is in mallards. We don't see game farm mallard genetics very much in black ducks.
Yep.
These things are, they're not picking differently. Now, perhaps the problem in the East is because they're essentially a hybrid swarm. It's a feral hybrid swarm out in the East.
You said something just a minute ago about you're seeing in the Atlantic population a different bill structure.
That's right.
What expound on that? What do you mean by bill structure, and how would what does it matter?
Right. Yeah. So the bills are shorter, right? They've got their lamella, which is essentially their teeth. kind of like a baleen whale, in whales, right? That's what they filter.
Filter through the
That's
feed,
right.
yeah.
The way their structure is specific to the way they filter. Now, these game farm mallards have wider gaps in their lamella. They have shorter bills.
And they've been bred to eat dog chow.
That's right. They've been bred to eat big seeds, bread, corn, big seeds, stuff that you could just buy. So you can picture if you take a park in the east and you make it into a beautiful wetland with wild seed, you've actually decreased the carrying capacity of the population size that can be maintained on there for that kind of duck. Because they can't actually eat it.
A part like duck just can't make a living on native seed.
That's right.
So how would that so there might be a reason based on what you're saying why the Atlantic population of mallards has gone from 1.5 million to 400,000.
Yeah,
it could be genetic.
So that's part of the hypothesis. We're testing that, but things are. I would say that at least in part it might explain things. Now we know that genetics is out there. That's a fact. How that genetics translates to population decline or not, we're continuing to look at that. But essentially, there's theory, and people again look at this, have really studied this because they have really great data sets and fisheries, and that's what you see typically when you do something where you're mixing wild and domestic. You might see a boom in population and a steady decline, because what's happening is more and more of that population is getting these traits that are just not good in the wild. Going back to a hen that's dumping eggs and doesn't care about those eggs is great in a domestic setting, not so great in the wild.
That's right.
You're looking at excessive aggression in males, so they're just mate. Yeah, that sounds great, but they're going to expand all of their resources and probably don't survive very well. Maybe they don't even mate correctly. Maybe they can't even do that correctly. Now, what you got to understand is that population decline isn't just all of a sudden. The steady decline could be because the hens are now a half egg worse every generation, or even a quarter egg. And the males are not surviving as great. Their kids are not surviving as great. And every generation, the population is getting worse and worse at surviving in the wild.
Well, a thought that comes to my mind is we start talking about the infiltration of a domestic mallard into a wild population.
Yep.
I'm imagining to myself a big old barn mallard, or a bunch I'm imagining these big old baby Huey mallards that are raised in the Minneapolis park, and here comes winter, and they're like, I don't have a genetic cue to migrate.
That's right.
I'll just weather it out. I'm a big fat mallard and I eat good, and people throwing me bread, but I don't have a genetic trigger to migrate south. Is there any basis to that?
So there's absolutely. Now I got to correct you. So so remember we did look at if it's the park mallard that's a problem. So these fat park mallards, but they're not a problem. The problem is these little skinny, flighty game farm mallards that are the problem, right? So if you're out in the east,
it's the ones the states and the governments and the private organizations put out in the wild that come from domestic,
more quote unquote sporty. So, and that's what the Europeans wanted. These little flighty birds, kind of looks like a greenhead, not a greenhead.
But as their genetic begins to predominate the genetic code of mallards in the Atlantic flyway, there could be an implication for migration south.
That's right. So I've got a bit of data, and we're testing this a little bit more, but what looks like, if you look at band recoveries from the Atlantic flyway, you got a particular population, and this population is U.S.-born mallards, not U.S.-born black ducks, not Canada-born mallards or Canada-born black ducks, but U.S.-born mallards have been steadily increasing in the number of band recoveries being found in the Mississippi flyway, and particularly in the northern part of the MAV, Mississippi Alluvial Valley.
The northern half.
The northern half is where they're being recovered.
They're not going far south.
They're not
flying down to Illinois and Arkansas and Mississippi and Louisiana.
That's not what it looks like. And when I did the work, it looked like 25% in any 1 year of all banded mallards in the U.S. side of the Atlantic flyway are being recovered in the Mississippi. Now, this tells me a whole bunch of birds are starting to move west for whatever reason, and that's where they're probably pair bonding, and that's why we're starting to see creepage of these non-native, non-wild genetics further and further west.
Well, I'm just trying to imagine this on a map. Is a bird, let's just say Maryland or Delmarva,
Yep.
Delaware, Maryland, and New Jersey, New York, that part of the eastern U.S., those birds are starting to creep over to the west and get on the upper Mississippi flyway. So now you got the genetic code does not want to migrate south. But you said earlier, way back when, that the birds coming out of Alberta, Manitoba,
Yep.
out of the Arctic, are still the wild genetic, and those are the birds we're seeing continuing to fly and do their migration down the Central Flyway. Mm-hmm. So, do you think it's a matter of, like I heard it say, oh, the mallard migration is moving west, or maybe what I hear you saying is, no, the eastern half of the U.S., the mallard migration is being retarded because of this genetic code?
Very well could be.
That's very possible, isn't it?
It's very possible, yes.
What will, as a part of that hypothesis, are y'all continuing to explore and research and do some work like that?
My grad student just came back from Mississippi Flyway Wingby a couple days ago, and we got 300 birds out of the Mississippi that we're going to do genetics on and start asking those exact questions. So those are wintering birds. So we're going to do source, where they're coming from. So what proportion of those 300 mallards are coming from X, Y, and Z? And on top of that, we're partnering up with state agencies that have got summer banding programs to get these local mallards, to start looking at what is the local genetics. The Great Lakes mallards, they've been declining for a while. Is that just because they've been declining, or they've been increasing in these poorly adaptive genes and traits through time? We don't know, and that's something that we're keen on answering.
Phil, do you have a website? Is there somewhere very easily that I'm gonna tell you, for a guy like me, even to get on Google and try to find some of these research papers, I don't have the time and inclination. I get overwhelmed with Viagra ads and everything else. but seriously, is there a resource that people could read up and follow up on some of this research y'all have done, or some of the studies, or website or something?
Yeah, there's been a few press releases on our work, but it's just it's just got published. So we're actually hoping to partner up with a few popular magazines, hunting magazines, that should expand on this and get the message out. But we're looking to get this message out any way we can. You can always, we should have a whole website, but we have a website, Lavretsky Lab. If you just Google that.
Lavretsky Lab.
Yeah, you'll find us.
You got a social media page? Does Lavretsky Lab have an Instagram account?
Yeah, we're on Twitter too. Mostly my grad students, and I tell them what to put on there because I don't know how to fumble through that stuff. You can check us out on there. We're constantly putting up, what's going on, what we're doing, what we're finding, what we're seeing. And the greatest thing is the anecdotal stuff, hearing from the hunters. This is a conversation that I want to start. To me, as a waterfowler, I see a mallard going over my spread. I want to be shooting wild mallards. That's me. I have no idea how the rest of this country feels. Maybe if it's a greenhead, it's a greenhead. But here's the thing. At this point, it's a bunch of privatized ducks that are potentially polluting one of our greatest resources.
That's a drive-home message, Phil, because, excuse me, I say all the time, bird watchers don't care. A guy looking through binoculars, and I'm not beating up on bird watchers, I'm saying a guy looking through binoculars at the park says, oh, what a beautiful wild mallard duck. He gets to see one, he checks it off his list.
That's
At
right.
a duck hunter, I want to see so many wild mallards they obliterate sunshine hitting the ground.
Me too.
And if we've got this genetic pollution going on, we're walking down the stairs instead of forward.
Look, we are potentially walking down the stairs of the bobwhite. All right, so bobwhites, there's a lot of reasons. Obviously, habitat's a real problem, but we're constantly trying to upgrade them with pen-raised birds. And lo and behold, those pen-raised birds rarely ever survive. And there's actually some nice genetic work that shows even by 3 generations, they half their egg production, right, in the wild. The number of eggs that are actually viable and create kids. So now you're halving it, and through time you're going to continue to halve it. And they don't have the instinct to survive. They don't have this instinct to mate correctly. All of these things. Once things are captive, they're captive. And that's a real hard thing to break. We're going down the line. We are, again, potentially going down the line of fisheries. You're looking at salmon fisheries, trout fisheries, where, yeah, I love catching rainbows too, but I know that they're hatcheries. And unless those fisheries, Fish and Game is stocking out, millions of fry out there, I'm probably not catching my limits today, right?
Right.
And here's the thing: do you want how much do you feel that in a decade or more or less, who knows how long this is gonna or what happens, but your currently $25 duck stamp, do you want to be paying for pen raised birds with those taxes?
No way, man. I mean, no, we're talking. We always talk about the future of duck hunting, and now we're talking about the most iconic North American species, the most iconic duck species in the Northern Hemisphere to a duck hunter, imperiled of continental and global decline.
And again, these declines are even we are watching the declines in Europe actually because of the same. So we throw out 210, they throw out 3 million, and because they need to throw out 3 million because they've lost their wild bird. And for exactly this reason, yeah. They're seeing the same exact. They're ahead of us because they've been doing this for a lot longer with a lot more birds, and they polluted their own birds to a greater extent. But basically, what they're dealing with, we may be dealing with in a short while here.
Wow. One more time, where can anybody listening follow you on social media? At Lavretsky Lab.
At Lavretsky Lab. Yep. Yeah, it's Gretzky with love.
There you
Lavretsky.
Go. Hey guys, thank y'all for listening. That's some pretty sobering news right there to find out that the most iconic duck species, our beloved mallard, is in peril. Can you imagine a world where you're only shooting tame ducks? Can you imagine that? Right here in North America where we hunters are footing the bill for everything, can you imagine us only shooting, quote, park ducks, unquote? I cannot. It's a very sobering thought. Follow us at Ramsey Russell Get Ducks on Instagram. If you've got any comments, if you've got any subject matter you want to hear, let us know, guys. Thank y'all for listening. See you next time. Duck Season Somewhere is produced by Ben Page. Original soundtrack by our friend Cody Huggins.